Listen only mode.
Oh, see your wrong screen.
There we go.
I see your the projector view there. No. I see this. Yeah. No, same one.
There.
There we go.
Holy balls. All right.
Shooting hard.
Hold on a second. I'm almost ready. I got to get my coffee.
You have your webcam on?
Yeah, I don't know, do I? You can check it out.
It's unlocked.
It's unlocked.
It's unlocked. Here, I'll show because there was a comment online. So, in case you didn't know, I'm growing it for the caps. It's not because I could grow over here. Caps, capitals, hockey.
Oh.
So that's why I have this mangy growth. Dude, one game, game 7. I can't wait. Let's see.
All right. Do you feel the power when you touch that thing?
There we go. Oop. That's disturbing. There, now
I'm on it, man. I'm like,
there you go.
like a little G God on this thing. We're good. Hi, guys.
Hey.
How was TCF?
Awesome.
Awesome. Geeking out, loving it.
Yeah.
You can see me now? Okay.
It's all you.
Where were we last week? Last week I was in Boston.
Yes. Did you go to the,
Nope. I fought politics for a full day. It was pretty good. Any questions about what we've covered so far? You guys have read chapters 1 through 7. We've only got like this class content and next class content next Tuesday, and then we're doing all practice exams. So you guys should feel, I don't know, like you've got a pretty good grip on a lot of this information so far. Anything anybody's struggling with? Any particular domain that's more difficult for you than others? Encryption? No? All right. Quiet class tonight. Not me. Get myself caffeinated.
I tell you, the time when we got to this class for at the boot camp, this is the same thing. Everybody's just like, sure.
Yeah, he had to do 4 days. He had to do 4 days.
Where'd you get the t-shirt?
Target.
And I'll be at University of Miami next month doing the same thing he did last week. That'll be interesting. But you know, maybe it's a little bit easier too, because you know you kind of keep this cadence going, whereas here, you know, you start, you stop, you start, you stop.
There's a lot less recap.
Yeah. We've got 115 slides, actually 114 because I deleted one when I was reviewing this morning. But it is pretty laid back tonight. We should have plenty of time, even though I apologize for getting started late. I was, doing whatever I do. Yeah, so we'll get through this entire domain tonight and really have just domain 8 left for next week. So like most days, we'll start with the quiz to kind of get us into the flow of things. So during the course of a penetration test, the testers discover signs of an active compromise on a new custom-developed 3-tier web application. What's their best course? Does that say source?
Yeah.
What's their best course of action? Quietly end the test, immediately call operational IT contact and escalate the issue. That's correct. You shut the server down, that'd be fun. That doesn't happen very often, by the way, but it does happen. You'd like to have a security firm test the new web application, but have decided not to share the underlying source code. What type of test could be used to help determine the security of the custom web application? Secure compiler warnings, fuzzing, static testing, white box testing. Which one? Well, static would mean I'd need probably need the source code, because static testing is testing not as it's running. Fuzzing. Yep. Yep, and white box, you got the white box, black box thing down. That'll be important for the test. I don't know what secure compiler warnings are. I don't think that will be on the test. I mean, I think it'd be a throw off. What type of penetration test will result in the most efficient use of time and hourly consultant expenses? So this is really reducing the amount of time that we have to do on reconnaissance and discovery and, you know, kind of all that stuff. So a full knowledge test would be the best, right? Where you give us everything that we want to know, diagrams, configs, source code if that's in scope, whatever. Yeah, yep. So what term describes a holistic approach for determining the effectiveness of access control and has a broad scope? Security assessment, security audit, penetration test, vulnerability assessment. Holistic, effectiveness of access control. This would be a security assessment. I'm sorry? Yeah, assessment. And you know the difference between assessment and audit? A lot of people don't, and I think it changes based on who you ask. It's like asking the definition of information security. If you ask 10 experts, you'll get 12 answers, and then we'll argue about it for 3 days. Same thing with kind of assessment and audit. An audit, to me, is just check box. You know, it's very cut and dry. It's very yes, no. Either you're doing this or you're not. There's not a lot of wiggle room. There's no really tests for effectiveness of the control. It's whether you have the control or you don't have the control. That's, in my mind, the difference between an audit and assessment. What term describes a black box testing method that seeks to identify and test all unique combinations of software inputs? A. Yep, that's combinatorial. That's the definition of it. All possible inputs. What's that? Exactly. Yep. And you'll see that on the exam too. You'll see the answer in the question sometimes, and it almost seems too obvious. But what term describes a no-tech or low-tech method that uses the human mind to bypass security controls? Social engineering. Yep. Uses the human mind. I think it's funny in the book because
I got 2 calls today from Jenna with the Social Security Administration telling me my Social Security number was going to be
deactivated
by the end of the day.
Yeah, they do that.
Did you give her your credit card information?
Yes.
Yeah,
Where can I
good.
All right. Before, when we weren't quite so corporate here, I mean, because now we're 60 some odd employees, so you get corporate-ier as you get bigger. But there were days when we would social engineer ourselves all day long, right, just to play games because you had time and it was smaller. But now you've got like a bunch of marketing people that work here and more sales people, and so yeah.
So easy is what you say.
Well, and then you got to clean up, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes kind of a
Quick,
task.
online access. When we're doing this, can you give them a second to read the answer before, like read through it before you answer it? Just because there's a slight delay, so you're saying the answer before they actually get a chance to even look at what.
Well, this is the last question, so
That's fine. Just something to keep in mind.
next time.
It's just a delay on the.
Right. Anybody here done social engineering before? It's pretty fun, yeah? Are you good at it?
I'm okay.
You got yourself in here, right? It's gonna be pretty good. I never checked your ID. Yeah. What's that?
Yeah.
A lot like dating? Well, that's the thing too.
You gotta keep a straight face.
If you really think about it, everybody's a social engineer. Everybody wants something from somebody.
You gotta know that you belong there. If you don't belong there, then they're gonna get you out right away.
My favorite and most skilled social engineer that I've ever known is my 13-year-old daughter. Right? She can talk me out of everything. She can talk my wife out of things. I'll get home and she's got a new pair of jeans from some, whatever. I'm like, what the hell? And, just the social engineering. Like last night, she actually talked to my wife. I'm not ripping on my wife, but she talked my wife into having a sleepover. It's like a Monday night. The hell, who does sleepovers on school nights?
Apparently.
You guys.
Not you. Well, I go along with it, right? I need to play the game too. But, yeah. Page 363, is that the page that we're on today?
Yeah. Throw something up. So I've been working as an antenna tech for the last couple of years, and it's in like about 800 jobs done, and out of that whole entire time, I think twice people challenged me on, are you who you're supposed to be?
Right.
One day, I was actually in, there were 2 towers. One people, they welcomed me in and put me in their rack room, and then we found out, because my paperwork, my assignment didn't even include the name of the company, very useful, and so I found out, no, actually I need to be at the other tower on the 15th floor.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're carrying a black bag and look like you.
Oh, yeah, if you look like you belong.
Act like you belong.
Yeah.
You just gotta walk in and not look at anybody and go just to one specific place.
Or just
Normally pretty good.
act like you
is
know.
that,
Act like you know where you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah, and fit in with the culture. You know, and it's easy to get into a lot of places that way. The Matt Finlay, he's our chief social engineer here. In his last test, he was showing me video, because sometimes he'll do tests with his phone in his pocket here with the video on, so that he has some good recordings for the customer. And the last one, they actually warned all the employees and all the contractors, we're going to be doing this physical social engineering test. Do not let anybody in without, ID and whatever. If you have any questions, call this number. And on his recording, he walks up to this contractor, because they're doing construction in one part of the building. And the contractor is like, no, I've been told that I can't let anybody in for any reason. We're doing that, because there's the social engineering test going on. And Matt says, well, I understand that, but I'm just here to check out the printer. I have my work to do. You have your work to do. And the guy's like, okay, and let him in.
Well, the contractor's going, dude, if it was me, I'd get so much crap if I didn't get my job done because somebody told me I couldn't.
Right.
He's trying to do him a solid.
Exactly.
Right?
And so the contractor actually walked him to the printer and then left. And so he was just there kind of all by himself. But it's all kinds of things like that. So I think before we left off last, we were talking about incident management and incident response. I don't know what I did with the first slide here, so I guess we're starting with detection. The first one, there was the preparation first. And it's funny, when I was in Boston last week, we were talking about how to make the case to executive management on our strategy that we've developed for this. It's a global company. And I just kind of sat there and observed, and you had the CIO and the CTO who were discussing, how we're going to, because they know the culture better. I'm the consultant. And they were talking about, we could go break into one of our stores and steal a server, or show that we can steal a server, and then that'll get our point across with, the board of directors. And another idea was, let's do some phishing attacks. And, it got really, really tactical. And what we finally decided, let's just go to the board and just put them in assume a breach, right? Just assume a breach has happened. And then what do you have to defend yourself? Because you know that no matter what you do, you cannot prevent all bad things from happening. You cannot prevent breaches in all circumstances, no matter what. It's just a matter of time, and it's a matter of circumstances before it happens to everybody, including FRSecure, right? We've got information too. We can't guarantee that the data is not going to be lost or stolen. And so if you put yourself into that mentality, what happens when a breach happens is automatically people go into this, what do I have to defend myself? Because the attackers used to be the people that actually stole the information. Now the attackers are your customers. Now the attackers are the regulators. Now the attackers are the attorney generals, opposing counsel, right? So you kind of have to, when you're working through an incident response, it's kind of the same mentality, because when you're doing the response piece, the containment, you want to be careful not to step all over, evidence, because some of that stuff is going to be defensible. Some of that stuff you're going to want to use to defend yourself in court, potentially. Does that make sense? If you just kind of put yourself into that mentality of just assume a breach happened. So you know what defensibility is, right? We talked about due care and due diligence before. That's the bar. Below the bar is where negligence lives. Above the bar is where good things live. Negligence is where liability lives. So when you're, in court, it's the preponderance of evidence, tipping the scale one way or the other. If you want to tip it your way, you practice due care and due diligence. And so you start asking yourself questions. Is it reasonable? Would a reasonable person do a risk assessment on a regular basis? Would a reasonable person have an asset management program, at least account for what assets that they're responsible for? So you play through those things. Would a reasonable person have an incident response plan or an incident management program? And the answer is, well, yes, because logically, no matter what I do, I can't prevent breaches from happening. Yet, when you go out and talk to real clients, it's less than half of them have an incident response plan. Well, less than half. I'd say less than a quarter. Would you agree? Quarter?
Have they functional or have one at all?
Well, I have one at least.
A realistic one.
Well, even having one that's dysfunctional is still somewhat defensible.
Yeah, it's probably a quarter to a third, maybe.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range that have something.
Right. So when you're working with clients and they don't have an incident response plan, an incident management program, it's quickly becoming indefensible. It used to be, it wasn't that long ago when ignorance was defensible, right? The board could claim that we didn't know, we were never told about this stuff, and that would be defensible, but those days are gone now.
You're seeing that with OCR, like when they do the
fine,
OCR, you no longer have the low end, the ignorance defense is no longer acceptable. They don't do that low tier anymore.
We talked before about administrative law, right? We talked about administrative law, civil, and criminal. The administrative law piece is really important when it comes to OCR, when it comes to the Federal Trade Commission or whoever the agency is, because when let's say that OCR comes and finds you negligent or deficient in whatever, they fine you $2, $3, $4, $5 million, and then they levy a compliance action plan on you. A CAP is what they call it, which is going to give you some prescriptive things that you're going to have to follow for the next 3 years, 5 years. Let's say that you disagree with them and you appeal. Who you're appealing to is the Department of Health and Human Services, who oversees the OCR, and the lawyers are all OCR lawyers. The judge is an OCR judge. You know what I mean? So you're appealing to, there's no chance. So just roll over and take it. Right? So it's really important to have this preparation piece, this defensibility piece, because this would be something certainly that they would not be happy with. But anyway, I'm on a tangent. So detection, knowing that I can't prevent all bad things from happening, what detective controls do I have in place? Would I be able to detect it? The average dwell time for most breaches today is over 100 days. So that means an attacker has compromised, on average. Sometimes it's years, right? We lack the ability to detect things. But understanding what all the inputs are into my incident response process. Maybe I'm log files, SIEM, alerting and monitoring, technologies are all important. Users are super important. They if you incent them to report things to you, it'll work out really well. Then the response. So step by step, what am I going to do? I shared last. Did you guys get a copy of that? Did you, anybody who wanted it anyway? That incident response, that tool, categorization tool. All right. Yeah. It's just a simple process, and you can easily dev something out. If you wanted something, on a intranet site or something.
206 days for finding a breach is the average.
206 days is an average? Yeah, and you'll see different studies. I've seen some studies as low as 140 days.
That's the latest fundamental one.
Yeah.
So, that's probably the best we're going to get.
Yeah. So step by step, depending on the classification and severity, what am I going to do? Who owns it? Who's going to be responsible? What are we going to, all that stuff is going to be really important for the containment. It's just going to be forensic. At some point along the way, you're going to make a determination, or the incident response team is going to make a determination. Do we think this is going to be legal? Do we think we're going to have to get law enforcement involved? Is it a reportable breach? All those things will play into whether or not you're going to do a forensic response. You don't want to do a forensic response unless you have to do a forensic response, right? Because there's no value in it. If you're going to go after attribution, try to find out who is responsible for that, that's probably not going to happen. It's a really deep rabbit hole. And then so that's when you start your root cause analysis. And for mitigation, you'll need to complete your root cause analysis, because the last thing you want to do is mitigate something and then find out that you didn't know the original cause of the something, and then the something happens again. And I've got lots of stories of where that happens. And then you start getting rid of the bad things, starting putting things back in place again. If it's a malware outbreak, start eradicating the malware, whatever. Reporting. You do want to, and I made that case last time I think we talked, that if you're going too fast, to document everything you're going too fast. Document everything. You can do it in a notebook, a notepad, you can do it on whatever, but document everything that you do. And then recovery, getting everything back to running again, increasing your monitoring to make sure that nothing looks unusual. We're back to a baseline. One of the things we're going to talk about today, when we talk about disaster recovery, we're going to talk about baselining. Normal operations, this is what it looks like. This is what the CPU looks like, or the network traffic looks like, or whatever. If you have those baselines, when you put things back into production again, you should be back at the baseline or close to the baseline, and then you just increase that monitoring, look for those deviations from baseline. Remediation, lessons learned, all that stuff. Yeah. Any questions on incident response? I'm sorry? Oh, there.
So one of the things that came up when we were doing practice tests that tripped me up, and so just as we're going through it, make sure you read the questions really well, because the question was, at what stage, it had a whole paragraph in basically said, what stage is root cause analysis completed, or is the bulk of root cause analysis happening? And we said stage 3, right, response, because we start our root cause at that point.
But most of it happens here.
But it's in mitigation. So just make know where these things actually lay, and make sure you read the questions. Don't assume anything.
That's right. And it'll be fun when we get to the practice tests, because there'll be a lot of good, healthy debate in here. That's the fun part of practice tests, because we haven't seen them. What we actually get them from, he arranged something with CISSP Clement Dupuis has been a guy who's been around since 20 years.
Yeah. Doing
CISSP practice exams, and so he got a free subscription for us to use in the class. That was Clement's contribution to this. So that'll be fun. We haven't seen those test questions either. You saw some of them.
I saw a small. We did about 150 out of the 2,500 or so in the database.
So that'll be a lot of fun. Don't miss next Thursday.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have class this Thursday, so more reading time. We have class next Tuesday and next Thursday. Hopefully you guys all got that schedule. All right, IDS and IPS. Man, they make it so easy nowadays. IDS and IPS used to be such a pain in the ass. I guess it still can be, but you had to do a lot of tuning with IDS and IPS back in the day. Now things are, I think they're a little bit more signature based, and the anomaly based stuff is a little more tuned in. But these are the types of alerts that you'd get from an intrusion detection system or an intrusion prevention system. Do you remember when we talked about promiscuous mode? Something sits on the network in promiscuous mode. Wireshark does that with our she's giggling again. But that's how intrusion detection systems typically work. Intrusion prevention systems in the traditional sense are inline systems. So traffic would flow through an intrusion prevention system, at least for the exam. You've also got intrusion prevention systems that can react to things out of band, send resets or send, different packets and block things, or change firewall rules. But for the most case, IPSs are inline systems. These are the different types of alerts that you can get. True positives and true negatives are true alerts. Those are not things that you would tune out. Those are things that you would respond to. Those would feed into your incident response process. But then you've got false positives and false negatives. A false positive is something that appears to be true, but it's not true. That's a false positive. You really need to make sure that if you are tuning your IDS, like Snort, if you guys want an open source IDS and you want to play with it at home, Snort is an easy one to play with. When you turn on a false positive, really make sure that it's a false positive, because you won't get alerted on it again, if you tuned it out. That's a problem. False negatives are things that just got through that it didn't get picked up. That would be something, usually that's a result of a false positive that I tuned out. I tuned out a false positive, and now the real attack happens, and it's a false negative because I'm not getting alerted to it anymore. Do you see what I'm saying? So knowing what these things are is definitely testable. The true ones are obviously good. So you got NIDs, NIPs, HIDs, and HIPs. So H's and N's, network-based, host-based. The P's and the D's, detection and prevention. Different types of detection types, pattern matching, protocol behavior, and anomaly detection. Pattern matching is just like signature-based antivirus, right? You've got a signature of attack traffic that's known. Typically, that's the most true alerting, but then you'll miss some of the newer attacks, like 0 days will get past pattern matching because until your antivirus, like in antivirus, until your IDS gets a new signature downloaded to it, it won't hit those. Protocol behavior is unusual protocol use. So like a Christmas tree attack, right? I told you about that one where I turn on all flags in a TCP packet. That would trigger a protocol behavior alert because it's unusual. It doesn't follow the RFCs. Anomaly detection is just, kind of like baseline, something that looks unusual from what I normally, or what the IDS system normally sees on the network.
Real quick, I'm just gonna.
Yeah.
Pattern matching or knowledge base is the most common. I don't know if you heard,
Yep.
if you've mentioned that, but that is something that we came across. So.
Okay. Yep.
Knowing that is the most common for NIDs, NIPs, whatever, IDs, whatever, however you want to call it.
What is and it's the most common and it's the most accurate, right? Because it's a match.
Isn't it the furthest behind?
Yeah. Yep. It won't catch. There'll be a gap between the time certain attacks are happening on networks and the time that your vendor releases a new pattern match or signature for it. So the one that's most likely to get past, or the one that's most likely to miss 0 days, if that's a test question, would be the pattern matching one. The one most likely to catch 0 days, but also have the most false positives, would be the anomaly detection. Do you see how all that works? Okay. Sometimes it's funny now because FUD sells a lot of stuff in our industry. You know that, right? There's a money grab that kind of happens in our industry. $96 billion will be spent this year on security stuff. And the big buzzwords nowadays are machine learning and AI, right? I was on the phone with one of our customers wanted me to talk to this company that was selling them some AI, basically an IDS, IPS AI. They gave it a fancy name and made it seem really cool. And I'm asking the engineer questions about, how does this thing operate, and tell me how your AI is AI. I'm not an AI expert. I'm genuinely interested. And so as it was she, but I was trying to throw you off a little bit. As she was explaining it to me, it dawned on me, like, this is just the same as anomaly detection IDS or IPS. And so I asked her, I go, how is this any different than like anomaly detection IPS? She goes, well, it's better reporting. And, I'm like, but the way it functions is the same way IDS has been functioning since like 2003 or 2, right? We've had this.
Different wrapper.
Right? It's funny how people are selling AI and machine learning, because there are genuine AI and machine learning products out there, but this wasn't one of them. SIEM is a big thing. We talked a little bit about SIEM before, Security Information and Event Management. Its purpose really is to collect logs from all kinds of various sources, to aggregate those logs, protect those logs, correlate those logs so I can see attacks happening across multiple systems.
Is that like Splunk?
And then reporting. Splunk can be used as an SIEM. Yep, but not exclusively. Yep, logarithm is another one that's popular out there. I mean, there's tons of them. There's so many of them. Continuous monitoring, just, you know, continuous monitoring, continually monitoring what's happening on the network. There's a ton of different things that you can use for that. Data loss prevention. There's two types of data loss prevention. There's network-based data loss prevention and host-based data loss prevention. There's data loss prevention-y things, like in Office 365, you can make that one data loss prevention. So it'll potentially protect your emails, any sensitive information that goes out on email, but it won't protect information that goes out through FTP or you know, HTTP or any other kind of transport protocol. So understand, if you're going to implement data loss prevention as an actual strategy, you need to think about your data flows and figure out, you know, the appropriate tools for that. Here's NIDS, NIPS. These two are NIDS and NIPS. H is host-based, right? There's a lot of different products that you can buy for host-based intrusion detection and prevention. But in a traditional sense, that one on the left, being that it's out of band, is an intrusion detection system. And the way most of them are set up is you've got sensors and then you've got reporting systems. So sensors all over the place and then reporting systems that are just collecting that data from the sensors and then, you know, doing whatever they're configured to do. Then the intrusion prevention system is an actual inline device, so it can block the traffic based on attacks. And nowadays there's UTM, Unified Threat Management, where you've got kind of all that stuff collapsed into one device, like a firewall. So a firewall might be running intrusion detection or prevention. It might be running data loss prevention. It might be running antivirus. It might be running web blocking. It might be running, you know, all these things in one device. So continuous monitoring, you know, assessing, reassessing, ongoing process. So if you check something and then a time elapses before you check it again, the time you checked it, there's like I like to think of it as like a shelf life. So if I did an assessment, let's say, the clock starts to tick as soon as that assessment's completed on how valuable that assessment actually is, right? There's like a shelf life to it. So the longer out it goes, the less assurance I have of what I saw is actually what I saw, you know, is actually still there. Does that make sense? So continuous monitoring kind of works the same way. So whatever I have assessed, you know, the value in that assessment deteriorates over time. So reassessing is really that continuous monitoring piece. Modern improvement, member certification and accreditation. Do you remember the difference between those two? That's testable for sure. Certification is essentially just reviewing the system, checking it off to make sure that it meets the requirements from the data owner. The acceptance of the certification is the accreditation, right? That's the difference between certification and accreditation. That's definitely testable too. So data loss prevention, I think, you know what that does. It prevents data loss. Network-based would be, you know, typically at egress points is where you put network-based data loss prevention. So it's monitoring all the network traffic, looking for specific patterns of, you know, sensitive information, and then either blocking that or reporting it. Host-based works the same way. It's just collapsed down to the host. A good strategy for data loss prevention is a combination of the two. All right, any questions on any of that? Pretty basic stuff, but important. So endpoint security, we've talked about host-based intrusion detection and prevention, antivirus, application whitelisting. Application whitelisting is one of the most effective protections for endpoints, truly. But very few companies actually do it because it takes a lot of work, right? And it can be disruptive to the business. But, you know, an application whitelisting would stop most ransomware, assuming you've put it in, you know, correctly. Removable media controls, that's not, you know, that used to be such a big deal, but I don't hear much about it anymore. People must not be using flash drives as much as they used to. But it's still a significant risk if you're not controlling what people can put on removable media. So just because it's not kind of in the news as much as it used to be, it doesn't mean it's not still a big risk. Disk encryption and privileged access, that's a big one too, right? People having administrative access to their workstations can defeat most of the controls we put in place on workstations. So we don't like that. But it's a strategy. It's no one thing. It's a combination of things that should be implemented for endpoint protection.
The removable media controls, yeah, so there's some that goes up there for about the USB drives, but it's mostly about looking at the phone up to the computer itself.
That's another
because
issue.
It transfers the data just as easy as it would be for a flash drive.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, that would be part of the strategy. Yeah, I mean, nowadays you can get like terabytes on a little flash drive. I mean, you got a lot of data. Honeypots and honeypots. So honeypots are essentially systems that are purposely put out there for attack, right? Some of them are virtual systems, some of them are live, real systems or simulated systems, and some of them are live systems. Then you've got a combination of honeypots would be what would make up a honey net. And you do need to be careful. I've mentioned it before, but there's that enticement versus entrapment case. So it is a good idea to get legal counsel just involved in, setting up a honey pot. Anybody here have a honey pot? You have a honey pot? You learn a lot from honey pot, so you can see kind of what the current things are that are happening. You can do it at home too, I suppose. I don't think Comcast or whoever your ISP is will block you. They will if it stays there for too long. Right? If they see that your system is being used to send spam, for instance, they'll eventually block it.
There's an open source one called Canary that's pretty good. It'll run on a Raspberry Pi.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat just to take into a network, plug it in, and
that's cool.
integrate next to it. Like it'll emulate SSH and Telnet, things like that.
Another thing that's kind of fun as just a test is get a system, with Wireshark on it, and then just open up and then set up just an RDP server, and you can do it virtual if you want to, and then just monitor the traffic when you open up that port. When you open up port 3389, they'll start to see kind of a trickle, and then it'll just get fast, right? Because especially with single factor authentication, they're going to tag it pretty hard to try to crack passwords. But you do it to learn or research, current attack methods so that you can improve your defenses. So there's a legitimate reason to do honeypots. Two different types of systems. Low interaction, those are the simulated systems, and then high interaction, which is actual systems. Good stuff. Asset management. It's kind of weird how we kind of shifted it a little bit, but asset management is a foundational component of a security program, right? I can't secure what I don't know I have. So moving beyond just default system configurations, which most people do, most people have, usually when we ask about, your configurations of your systems, most people say, well, yeah, we got a gold image that we deploy everywhere. Maybe it's, in virtual, they've got an OVA that they deploy or whatever. But then you ask, is it hardened, right? And that's when things go silent, because most people don't harden their operating systems. They leave them pretty much at default. And when you leave them pretty much at default, that means that the logs aren't going to be sufficient when an incident does happen. Plus, they're going to be less secure than they would have been if they were hardened. So you kind of defeat yourself in a couple different ways. Hardened baseline configurations. Hardened means we just only allow or only enable the specific services, the specific applications that are required for that server to operate, right? I was told very early on when I was, younger in this industry, that the best defense you have for information security is intimate knowledge of the systems that you're responsible for. So if you really know your systems really, really well, you'll notice things that other people won't notice and stuff like that. So baseline configurations, going through that work of actually of establishing a hardened configuration, really does make you a better security person for that environment that you're securing, because you do have to go through the work of, well, this service isn't required, that service is, and you know what I mean? CIS is a good place to get some benchmarks, is what they call it, for baseline or some hardened configurations. Also, I think I mentioned before, what was the STIGs? It's another good place, which is a DoD thing. So disabling unnecessary services, removing programs, enabling firewalls, file integrity monitoring is a nice addition to, hardened configs, stuff like that. Baselining is just taking a snapshot, a point in time. This is the normal operation for this system. There's 4 subsystems that are typically monitored on a system to establish a baseline. You've got disk utilization, memory, CPU, and network. Those are the 4 subsystems for establishing a really good baseline on things. And then you can, notice those deviations. Responding to security incidents, also baselining and unauthorized changes to configurations. So once you get your configuration down, if you don't do anything with change control or configuration management, who cares, right? Because it's only a matter of time before somebody who's an admin will change a configuration and you won't know about it. So you really have to take hardened configurations, marry that with change control, marry that with access control, and then establish baselines to notice the deviations, right? Because you can't really baseline something you're not controlling. There won't be a baseline. It'll just continue to fluctuate because people will keep doing stuff on them. And I've never been able to understand why people allow internet browsing on servers. Do you guys allow admins to do that? I mean, that's like playing with fire, right? Or checking email on servers. You should do egress filtering. All HTTP and SMTP traffic from servers should always be disabled. And that should feed into alert too, right? If one of your admins is surfing the web they might be doing it for troubleshooting purposes, but there's other ways to troubleshoot stuff rather than actually on the server.
Yeah, 15 years ago, most admins would have had some portable device. They could just walk in the server room.
Well, do you remember the TechNet CDs? Used to walk around all the time with TechNet CDs, big portfolio of all these CDs because there wasn't anything online to find answers to questions. So you'd have to find the right TechNet CD, load it up, and find your. And then every month, Microsoft would send you new TechNet CDs with an updated knowledge base. It was such a pain. Nowadays, you just Google everything, right? You don't have to be very creative in troubleshooting like 99.9% of everything that's out there because somebody else has done it already. So you can Google. Vulnerability management. Scanning is one part of vulnerability management. Vulnerability management is obviously, as you know, it's an ongoing process. We find vulnerabilities in one of 2 places. It's either missing patches or updates or poor configurations. Those are the 2 most common places to find vulnerabilities in an environment. A vulnerability is nothing more than a weakness. So vulnerability is not risk. A lot of people will assume that a high severity vulnerability is a high risk. Not necessarily. You have to take that into context of the threats that apply to that vulnerability, right? We've talked about risk management before, vulnerabilities and threats. So if there are no applicable threats to the vulnerability, then there's no risk, right? But most people will just say, well, it's a high severity vulnerability, it has to be remediated within X number of days, and that's that. So missing patches, configuration errors are the 2 most common places to find vulnerabilities. Vulnerability scanning, tons of different tools out there. What are some of your favorites? You guys are doing vulnerability scanning? Nessus, Tenables, Nessus. You're using Security Center? Okay. The Security Center is kind of nice. It gives you some nice little dashboards and stuff like that. Because Nessus, out of Nessus Pro, what the hell's the name of it? The one that the local install is really limited in its reporting capabilities. So you dump those reports and not going to find much use in it. Qualys, anybody using Qualys? Nexpose?
Nikto, open source.
Nikto is more of a web application testing. Yep, but yeah, Nikto is a good tool. If you want a free one, and you play around with this one too at home, OpenVAS is free. OpenVAS, was a fork from, I think I was saying before, from Tenable. But the big ones are Qualys, Nexpose. Nexpose is run by Rapid7. They're also the maintainers of Metasploit. Tenable, Nessus, and OpenVAS are probably the biggest ones. Now, they all use this one common scoring system, the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, which is the CVSS, and I think I mentioned that last week. It's currently version 3. And CVSS is important because I'm going to use something like CVSS to determine the effectiveness of my vulnerability management program over time, right? Because you can take certain metrics, like take cumulative CVSS score. Like, so we're just going to add up all the CVSS scores of all the vulnerabilities that are found in my environment. And we're going to say it's like 10,400, right? And I do my vulnerability scan in the next week or the next month, and I find out that it's 9,300. That's awesome, right? And then you can start building in trends over time, which is nice for, executive management when I want to know why you're spending 10 grand on vulnerability scanners. So prioritization, remediation of vulnerabilities. You can use CVSS scores just straight out of the box. The CVSS score is just a severity of the vulnerability itself. That's a screenshot of OpenVAS. It's even got a nice little dashboard. Greenbone is the maintainer of OpenVAS, sort of. But yeah, OpenVAS is sort of fun. And that's Tenable. And that's just if you've seen Tenable before. This is a vulnerability management process. It's good to document what your vulnerability management process is. You can see that it's a cycle. It starts with identification and prioritization of assets. You can use your vulnerability scan to do that, right? But you want to know if some assets are more important than other assets, right? Which will affect the impact of the vulnerability. Then identifying the vulnerabilities, remediation of the vulnerabilities, setting up SLAs so everybody's on the same page, kind of all that stuff. And I can show you one that I just finished yesterday, actually, for a client. This is their SLA that we established. This is the name of the client. It's not confidential, so I can share it. But these are the SLAs we established. So critical severity vulnerability, CVSS scores of 10, 2 day. You have 2 days to remediate that. If you don't remediate that, you have to file an exception with me. So I'm the virtual chief information security officer for this organization, and it'll have to be approved. So when you first implement this is going to get really hairy. I'm going to get a ton of emails, I assume. High severity vulnerabilities, 30 days. Medium severity vulnerabilities are 90 days. Low severity vulnerabilities, it's 180 plus days. Those are all optional. You don't have to even remediate those if you don't want to. But that's just an example of kind of how we implement sometimes those things. Here's guidance from ISO. This is ISO 27002, 2013. This is the latest ISO standard. It's great guidance for technical vulnerability management. Process, implemented, effective, systematic, repeatable. So that's our cycle. Starts with asset management. Awesome, right? That's fundamental. That's foundational. It's amazing how many people try to run security programs without any semblance of asset management. It's sort of crazy. But starts with asset management, tracking operating systems, software, version numbers, lists of software installed, all that stuff. And then having roles and responsibilities, having clear definitions of what needs to be remediated when and how and all that stuff. And then more stuff on vulnerability management. And this is all still under that header of asset management, right? This is the most exciting thing you've done today? Ooh. You guys all got this figured out, though, I assume. So, Lord knows all our clients do. Right? What are you giggling for? 0-day vulnerabilities and 0-day exploits, the definitions of these are testable. So a 0-day vulnerability is a vulnerability for which there's no patch for or no fix for. That's a 0-day vulnerability. It's not that, it just came out today kind of thing. There may be weeks, months, years for a vulnerability to get patched or have a working workaround from the vendor. That's a 0-day vulnerability. A 0-day exploit is the same kind of thing. It's an exploit for the vulnerability. Make sense? 0-day vulnerabilities and 0-day exploits. And the reason why patching is so important is a lot of attackers are if they didn't know about a vulnerability after Patch Tuesday comes out, now they know about a vulnerability and they reverse engineer the patch and find out what the vulnerability was, and they'll come out with an exploit right away, knowing that most people won't get to the patches all that soon. Most of those CVSS score of 10, which is the critical, have publicly known exploits available for them. So, I mean, it's script kiddies that can exploit those vulnerabilities. It's not super high-tech people. All right, so change management. Get asset management down. Now I can't effectively secure what I can't control. Change management is implementing, that control. Change management is more art, I think, than science because, just basic questions like what should go through the change management process and what shouldn't go through the change management process. Usually we say something like a significant change. Well, what's a significant change? Is it a change to the configuration? Is it a change to user accounts, a change to service accounts? All kinds of different things. So you need to define what is a change in the environment before you implement a change management program. Every organization is different, but really what the fundamental things or the important things in change management is every change needs to be vetted. It needs to be approved. It needs to be accounted for. It needs to be documented. It needs to be auditable. And you need to have a backup plan. Ideally, you'll have a change window in there somewhere too.
Do you have a recommended approach for this when you're dealing with like cloud services that iterate constantly and break every now and then? Same thing with software now, kind of like iterates and breaks over and over.
Oh, the vendors are changing things that you don't know about, and then it breaks what you were doing?
Yeah.
You'd have to work with the vendor. I mean, you're kind of married to it.
On your Office 365 system,
Oh, I don't even know about most of the changes that are happening within Office 365. Do you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, you can try to take it up with the vendor or try to use, you're kind of stuck with it. I don't know how you could control it. It's not like Microsoft's going to follow our change control process.
It's not like my people are going to be okay using some other product.
Right. It's one of those things you just accept it. Yep.
Yeah. Wasn't that the issue when Chrome switched to constant updates? A lot of businesses said, no, we can't do this because they also had to be able to verify and certify application testing and other things. So there they did get concessions in that they will maintain certain stable releases for a period of time, whereas consumers, we get the constant upgrades.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But businesses can freeze it here, jump to the next level of certain once a year or so.
Well, it goes back to our, prioritization of our assets and then baseline configurations, right? So like on a server, changes to Office 365, if it's a critical server, there should be no effect to that environment, right? It's isolated, so who cares, right? Some clients might get affected, but they're less critical than, less critical systems. So I'd be more prone to accept those risks than, if it was some kind of thing that the server was, an API that the server was connecting to and that changed, something like that. But yeah, you just have to accept it, I suppose. I had a lawyer once, this was back when I worked for a company called eLoyalty, which became, Mattersight Corporation. They're a public company, and I was their first director of information security or CISO, whatever the hell I was there. And I had a lawyer that worked in Chicago that actually redlined a Microsoft end user license agreement and wouldn't allow the purchase to be approved until it was sent back to Microsoft. I don't know if it's just to prove some kind of point, but I looked at it and I was like, are you shitting me? Really? Do you think Microsoft is going to, okay.
Mattersight just got bought by Magazine Contact.
Oh, did they? Okay. So how do you know Mattersight? Oh, yeah. So you used to be telco, right? Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, cool. Mattersight never made a dime. Never, ever turned a profit. Still, to this day. Really cool technology, though.
So the technology they're doing is far out.
Behavioral analytics. But the way they implemented those, the environments, every client got a completely new setup environment. So what you ended up having is every time you sign up a customer, you have a brand new environment, meaning with domain controllers, SIEM, all that stuff. So it got really expensive. They could never seem to figure out how to recover their costs.
The stuff they're doing now with speech analytics for contact centers for routing. When somebody calls in by their speech, where to send that call.
Is Kelly Conway still the CEO there? Okay.
What level of mad are you when we get you to the?
Yeah, they've always been able to do that with the behavioral analytics piece. But anyway, another tangent. Yeah.
Sounds really mad and be pleasant.
Yeah. So here's a typical process flow for change management. Identify the change, propose the change, assess the risk. So you have to get information security involved, probably early on in this process. Testing the change, having a backup plan, scheduling the change. Is there a change window? All those kinds of things. And a lot of times you'll have an input into the change management process where one of the first things you're going to choose is the type of system that's subject to the change. If it's a critical system or a customer-facing system, you'll go through change windows. Whereas, like, if it's some back office something, you wouldn't go through that. But notifying impacted parties, this goes back to data classification, having that data owner or the system owner being notified and in the loop on these changes, implementing the change and then reporting the results of the change. In a perfect world, all changes would be trackable and all changes would be auditable. If something was changed in a server, in a perfect world, if something was changed on the server that didn't have a change control associated with it, that would be an incident. Right? That would go through the incident response process because there's got to be some reason why the system changed. Rarely do people do that, but that's the way I'd like to do it. Service, yeah.
Yes, online, is a backup plan required?
Should be.
Oh, gosh,
Yeah. I just want to make sure everyone here got that about it.
Yep, should be.
And my answer was the exact same as what you said, but.
Yeah. I've made plenty of changes without backup plans and learned the hard way. I've learned the hard way on that one numerous times back in the day. I used to make much more of a maverick than I am
the
today.
level of detail on the plan maybe could be dependent on the level, the class of the change, but everything should have some sort of a backup plan, even if it's just restore the snapshot.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, snapshotting systems is always a great idea before you implement the change, so that you can
another step in the plan though to validate snapshotting.
On critical systems, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, well, it should be part of the change.
Plans to decide when to back out.
Right? Like, oh, I can still do this. I can still get it. I can still get it. I can still get it. And you're like 9, 10 hours. It's like 6 in the morning. I can still do it.
An hour and 48, you reassemble it all back away.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in our, time, you have a window and then.
Yeah, that's the best way to do it.
Not that it's following.
I was gonna say, you said, but then you still get there and you're like, no.
But all the customers who review the documentation are really impressed. Yeah. Service level agreements, SLAs are, obviously important to have for those critical vendors who, usually this affects availability, having SLAs in place. Backups, we've talked about backups before, but this is, more of a recap. Some of you that are technology people, this will be just basic stuff. I debate that second bullet point, and I can't remember if I got that from the book or not, but magnetic tapes are not the most popular anymore. Most people are doing online backups.
That's changed in just the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Generally, it had been the cheapest type, and a lot of more tape technology.
Well, people were resistant to change, right? Then too, so that they were just used to Iron Mountain coming every week or every day and taking tapes, picking tapes.
In the trunk of my car, not the
That's right. You'll need to know the difference between the different types of backups, so full, incrementals, and differentials. Full backups, we're going to go through it anyway. Full backups are backing up everything. Regardless of what the archive bit is set at, it's just going to back up everything, the most expensive type of backup, but also the most complete type of backup. When I restore a full backup from a full backup, it's just one backup set, right, to restore that backup. Easy enough. Incremental backups will back up everything that's changed since the last incremental or full backup, right? So this it's less expensive, right? They're fast backups. So I'd use them in places where there's a lot of data change that potentially would overrun my backup tapes, right? So I'd use incrementals. The problem with incrementals is that in order to restore them from a backup, I have to use the full backup and every incremental up to the time of the restore point, right? So if I do, say dailies on Sundays and I do incrementals throughout the rest of the week and the system fails on a Friday, I would need Sundays full backup, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays incremental backups. The more tapes I need for backups, the more chance there are of things being broken, right? The media being...
What's the point of doing incremental backups if it doesn't have the full plus the change?
What do you mean? It does have the full plus the change.
Then why would you need to have each incremental? The last incremental should be the full plus all.
No.
That's a
They
differential.
work together.
That's a differential.
Use an incremental
Backup.
where you might be running out of time, your backups are getting so big that your backup window isn't gonna allow you to do more, so you want smaller, quicker backups. As a trade-off of knowing if you've got to recover, main set and then tape 2, tape 3, tape 4, etc.
Yep. So you do it in places where you can't afford the time to do differential backups. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about a differential backup, which is this next one. So a differential backup is the full backup and everything that's changed since the last full backup, right? So in order to restore in the same scenario, Sunday I do full backups, I do differentials every day, and and I have a failure on Friday, all I need is the Thursday's differential and the full backup from Sunday to restore the system. So I only need 2 tapes, but that differential, each day that gets out from the full backup gets more and more and more data, which takes more and more time to back up. That's why I would do potentially incrementals, because there are just so many changes in the environment data-wise that I can't afford to do differentials. They're not getting done on time, too many tapes, whatever.
A lot of it depends on the company's recovery time objective as well, and the recovery
Mm-hmm.
objective.
Yep, more the recovery point objective than the recovery time objective, usually. And so the recovery point objective, recovery time objective is how much time I can go with the system being down before it's back up and running. The recovery point objective is how much data I can afford to lose from the time it failed to the time I can restore it. That's the difference between those two, which I think we'll get to anyway in the SaaS recovery stuff. Any questions on full backups, incrementals, and differential backups? Pretty basic stuff. So RAID stuff, we've talked a little bit about RAID before. You'll need to memorize this one. There's no RAID 2 in there. That's Hamming code. That's because it's never really functioned, and it's probably not testable, but we'll go through it anyway. But this is a good table to memorize. So different types of RAID, mirroring is just taking something that's over here and putting it the same exact thing over here. Usually it's a disk-to-disk RAID. 1 is a mirror. Write times are slower. You'll need to memorize this. Write times are slower on RAID. 1, I'm sorry, this is RAID 1. RAID 0 is striping without parity. But RAID, am I getting that right? Yes.
Yeah.
RAID 1 is the mirror.
RAID 1 or RAID 0 has 0.
Yeah, no parity, but super fast, super duper fast, because I don't have to write parity, and I can do writes and reads simultaneously. With mirroring, write times are going to be slower, read times are going to be faster, right? So you'll need to memorize those two things. Most costly, certainly in terms of disk usage, because it's 1-to-1, right? Striping and parity are two different things. There's striping with parity, and there's just striping, right? So striping is just writing data across disks, and it'd be, this, point A to point B on this disk, then point B to point C on the next disk, and so on and so forth, and then it would circle back around and write again. The parity is writing that same type of thing with a parity stripe, they would call it, or that you call it. What's that? It can be a bit, or it can be a byte, but it's a parity stripe is usually what we call it. But a parity stripe is then used to rebuild a drive that fails in that array, right? Then there's RAID 6. I think you were talking about RAID 60 before. That's dual stripe or dual parity, where I can afford to lose more than one disk, in that array. But parity is just used to rebuild the drives that failed, where striping is just writing across multiple disks. This is a RAID 0, so this is just a striped set. You notice there's no parity bit here. There's no rebuild. You actually shoot yourself in the foot in this type of configuration. You never see it anymore.
Suicide rate.
Yeah, right? It's super duper fast, but now, before I had just, my chances of a disk going bad was just one disk. When I stripe across 5, now any one of those 5 disks fails, I'm screwed, because there's no parity, there's no rebuild here, there's no redundancy here. RAID 1, a mirrored set. Again, remember, write time is slower, read time is faster in a RAID 1. And everything's just mirrored, ABCD, disk to disk, increased cost. And this is, now there's combinations, which we're going to get to in a little bit. You know, like there's RAID 10, there's RAID 50, there's RAID 60, there's all kinds of different RAID array types. You don't have to worry about that too much on the test, just stick with the basics. Hamming code, it never really worked, because you needed 14 or 39 disks to work with Hamming code, which was expensive, not going to be tested, so don't worry about it. I think the reason why it's even covered in the book and why it's here is just so you don't ask, well, how do we get to RAID 1 to RAID 3? What's happened with RAID 2? That's RAID 2, right? Now, RAID 3 and RAID 4 are essentially the same. The only difference is one's byte level and one's block level, so you have to get these two correct. Instead of parity being written to across the drives, there's a specific parity drive that all the parity data is written to, right? So now that if that drive fails, the other drives fail, you're fine, but if that drive fails, you're sort of, could potentially be screwed. I guess that drive and maybe another drive would have to fail. But the difference here is byte level and block level. So RAID 3 is byte level with a dedicated parity drive, and RAID 4 is block level with a dedicated parity drive, right? That's the difference between those two. And RAID 5 used to be the most common, but now there's all kinds of different arrays built off of RAID 5. But RAID 5 is, you need to have at least 3 disks for RAID 5 to work, because you'd have to have that parity drive, the parity stripe written across the different drives be used to rebuild a failed drive. Does that make sense? So 3 to, I don't think there's a limitation, because now there's hardware controllers that are running all this, which makes it even a lot faster. One of the most popular RAID configurations, stripe set with distributed parity, so parity is written across the drives. Block level striping, the parity is used to rebuild the drives. We talked about that. Written across multiple disks, whatever. Any questions on RAID 5? That's what RAID 5 looks like. Minimum of 3 disks for RAID 5. Then there's RAID 6, which is stripe set with dual distributed parity. This allows me to lose multiple drives in essentially a RAID 5 array. I can, with dual distributed parity, I can lose multiple drives. In a RAID 5, I can only lose 1 drive. Right? If I lose 2 drives in a RAID 5 array, I've lost my data. But in a RAID 6, I can lose 2 drives in that same array, essentially, and still survive. And then there's RAID 1.0. You just combine the two. So a RAID 1.0 would be striped mirrored drives. Right? So it still has some redundancy. It can get really complicated quick with all the different configurations you can do with RAID. But you guys get the basics. Other fault tolerance things, redundant hardware and redundant systems. So redundant hardware, power supplies are really popular. Redundant power supplies or redundant network interface cards is really popular. But it's typical hardware that fails in computer systems and having redundancy there. Redundant systems is entire systems that are redundant. So if one system goes down, you've got another one to back it up. HA is sometimes used, in relation to redundant systems, somewhat the same. Any questions on that? Oftentimes it's more expensive, less expensive to have a trusted vendor who can deliver according to an SLA than it is to actually, or have spare systems on hand, a few of them, than it is to actually implement redundancy in the system, right? So there's lots of different strategies for that. All right, any questions? BCP DRP, this is where it gets super exciting. Anybody love doing DRPs? Did you really?
Not my own, but I like helping out.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that.
It's a lot more fun when it's not my responsibility.
Right? It's like the auto mechanic. They hate
Right.
working on their own cars.
Yeah. Did you think of this? Did you think of this?
Yeah.
Oh.
But you'll need to memorize these. These are important. BCP and DRP to the layman are the same thing, but they're not the same thing. DRP is part of the BCP, so is the continuity of operations plan. The thing to remember about continuity of operations plan is that's during. I should underline during. That's during a disaster. It keeps the business running during the actual disaster. It's not about recovery with a continuity of operations plan. Business continuity plan is a longer term plan that accounts for the entire operation, the entire business. A disaster, obviously a disruptive event, but you do need to define specifically what a disaster is in a disaster recovery plan so that there's no gray area, and somebody needs to be charged. Somebody has to have the responsibility of declaring a disaster, right? You just don't want anybody declaring a disaster and then assembling the disaster recovery team and starting your recovery efforts. Disaster recovery plan, short-term plan, typically a lot more IT focused with the disaster recovery plan. The mean time between failures are systems that fail over time. Oftentimes manufacturers will figure out what the mean time between failures are so that you can plan, especially in your critical systems, how often do I expect a power supply to fail? How often do I expect a NIC to die? How often do I expect a hard drive to fail? All those things are mean time between failures, which you have to account for in your DRP. And then your mean time to repair is how long it takes for me to get the system repaired back up and running again. BCP, we've talked about that already, ensuring that the business will continue to operate before, throughout, and after a disaster, whereas a continuity of operations plan is just during a disaster. That's the one way to tell the difference between those two. Focus of BCP is the business as a whole, long-term strategy, a much more, to do a BCP correctly, it's a much more involved process, right? You have to get a lot of business units involved in a BCP. Long and drawn out. DRP, more tactical, specific, usually more specific to IT-oriented disruptions, things like that. Immediate response to disasters, doesn't focus on long-term business impact, but the DRP hands off to the BCP to handle the longer-term outlook and things. And I'm about ready to get to that diagram that I was talking about last week, where you've got, kind of where the plans all fit together. BCP is the umbrella plan. It's the king of all plans when we talk about, keeping businesses running during bad things happening. Two plans, different scopes, intertwined, talked about that. NIST-SP 800-34 is sort of the good guidance. It's a really good, if you are tasked with BCP or DRP or continuity of operations or whatever else, it's a good read for that. It's a good reference document. And if you were just totally done with all your reading for the CISSP and you had some spare time, read this one too, along with NIST-SP 800-53 and NIST-SP 800-60, be another good read. Yeah, this is the diagram I was talking about. So you can see that the incident response plan is also tied to the business continuity plan, which it should be, because some incidents, information security incidents, are actually longer term problems, like the Atlanta ransomware outbreak, right? That, assuming that they had plans, I don't know what plans they had, but if they had plans, you'd start with the incident response plan. You're like, oh crap, this is bigger, longer than what we expected. It would then be a handoff to the BCP. Some people put it, through the DRP, but whatever. In general, this is what it looks like. So you can see the only one that's there for sustaining during an actual disaster is the continuity of operations plan. But you've also got the occupant emergency plan, crisis communications plan, disaster recovery plan, business recovery or BRP, business resumption plan. The big ones for the test are going to be continuity of operations plan, the disaster recovery plan, and the business continuity plan. Those are the three main ones that you'll see on the exam. Okay? All right, and then more things, different types of disruptive events. People skip this step oftentimes. They'll skip a true threat or risk analysis for business continuity or disaster recovery, but it shouldn't be overlooked. Like natural threats, human threats, and environmental threats. So where this plays a big role, like I would plan for a potential volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii. I wouldn't plan for that here, right? So I don't account for those specific threats in my plan. Human threats, if I'm a government entity, I'm probably more of a target for human threats, right? Protesters, disrupting, our operations, or one of the companies I worked for was a company, a big pharmaceutical company, not big, but a pharmaceutical company called MGI Pharma, which was bought by Azi, and that was actually my last job before I came and did this. But we had a research facility in Baltimore, not too far away from Johns Hopkins University, which I think is also in Baltimore. Obviously, It's got to be. And we did animal testing there, right? Because you don't test drugs typically on humans first, right? But we had protests all the time. PETA people would protest and block our vehicles coming in and out of the facility, all kinds of things. So we had to account for that in a business continuity plan. Whereas here at FRSecure, we probably aren't accounting for PETA. Now, some of the guys in the back.
Confidential information.
Can you put that out there?
What's that? Put what out there?
Your security posture.
Our security posture here?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
We'll figure it out and it happens.
Yeah. Whatever.
There you go.
And then environmental threats. So,
Confident.
environmental threats, we do, when we do business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans, we do actually go through this process. One of our clients is located right next door to a strip club, down in the warehouse district in Minneapolis. That attracts a different element than here in Minnetonka, where, there's no strip club around here. There's no liquor store around here. We have another client who's right across the street is a liquor store, right? So I think you get the point. You need to account for the natural threats, the human threats, and the environmental threats. Environmental threats are typically related to like HVAC systems, power systems, stuff like that. Those will have to be accounted for. Experian was another organization I worked with in Manhattan. Power in Manhattan is like notoriously crappy, right? So they have to plan for, generators and all that stuff. Anyway, you get the point on all this stuff. Other disruptive events, errors and omissions. Human error is usually number one still. You can you can offset some of that risk by, really good training, establishing a culture, whatever. Natural disasters, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, tsunamis. Imagine we got a tsunami here. It'd be a big ass wave. Get all the way up here. But we don't account for earthquakes here, hurricanes, floods we do. Tsunamis, no. Snowstorms, yes. Ice storms, yes. Severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, those are all, kind of relevant here. This is a place where it's a free place where you can go, USA.com. Just type in the address and it'll give you some threat data. Because one of the things that's challenging is trying to find an aggregate of natural threat data. And this is a good starting point as an indicator to new places. What's that?
And it's way over the average.
Oh, for tornado index?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is, so we do want to account for tornadoes here.
A lot of it, right, depending on, so coming from Kentucky where you see a lot of them along the river, way lower, right, because the river will disrupt, so we're not near the river, we're kind of in between it where it funnels.
Airports are a big thing too, being close to airports. Yeah. But you can see, there's all kinds of good data here. Blizzards, 39 over the last 60 years. Cold, dense fog, strong winds, heavy snow. So this is good indicators of natural threat data that we can indicate. USA.com. Yep, it's free. We like free.
That's probably somebody asked me in the class where we got that from. I'm like, oh man, I forgot. It's right there on the page.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. One of them goes, well, what's USA.com? I'm like, oh, that's it. Right in that first paragraph under like earthquake, it just uses USA.com algorithms. Oh, that's where we got it from.
Electrical power problems, you can check with, I don't know where you check to get, a good source of that data, but, you want to account for it. You can just ask people, maybe people live around here. You can ask them, how often power goes out, whatever. Temperature, humidity failures, those are also, very common. Those are more environmental issues. Mean time between failures, we talked about that already. If I've got high humidity, what was the one thing that really, remember high humidity and low humidity? Static and erosion, right? Erosion in high humidity environments. Corrosion. No, that's not what I meant either.
Corrosion.
Corrosion. Did I say corrosion or did I say erosion?
Corrosion.
Okay, I meant corrosion. Thank you. Right, yeah, you'd have to have a hell of a lot of humidity for erosion. Yeah, corrosion and static, because that'll be testable too. Bless you. Warfare, terrorism, sabotage. Everybody likes, no, nobody likes that, but we're probably not much of targets here. Maybe sabotage a little bit. We do work with a lot of clients that, potentially, but we don't normally keep, we don't keep a lot of sensitive data here for this reason. What?
Espionage.
Oh, yeah. Sure. That'd be human. Yep, that'd be human. Financially motivated attackers, that's a big one today. Those are potentially disruptive, like ransomware, like the Atlanta breach. That would be a classic example of a financially motivated attacker that caused a significant disruption and or disaster. Personnel shortages, we're not union here, but union disruptions are big. I was just talking to somebody today whose father used to work at Northwest Airlines. Do you remember when they had that big when they all struck and then basically the line got busted and they were sold to Delta shortly after that. But those are things you have to account for in certain instances, personnel shortages. This is from the Verizon breach report, BBIR. Just to give you an idea of what data they have, right? The motivation between the attackers, espionage is there, financial motivation, everything else. So there are sources of places where you can find indicators of this stuff. Pandemics and disease, major biological problems. These are cool movies. I watched what's the crap? See, World War Z. It was on TV. Yeah, it was on the TV on my way back from Boston last week. Watched the whole movie. Killed the whole trip. It was awesome. Pandemics, diseases, strikes, personnel availability, having people, critical, people unavailable. It's a big deal. Communications failures. You need to account for these in your disaster recovery and business continuity plans. How are you going to communicate? Out-of-band communications, redundant communications, all those things are super important in disasters. Don't rely on, does anybody even use? No, we talked about this before. Analog phones are still being used. People fax stuff.
Well, people are still driving two-motor cars.
For real? Do people ride horses still?
Faxing is still fairly widely being used.
Yeah. So the disaster recovery process, different phases, and it's hard to read there, but you'll see on the exam probably something that pits some other motivation against, human safety. Human safety always trumps. Just can't drive that home enough. So the disaster recovery process. First, the response. Somebody needs to take a look at what's happening and do an initial assessment of what we're working with. Speed is certainly important in the initial assessment because we need to know if we need to get our hands around it now or what have you. A lot of times that will come from a security-related incident, and it'll come through the security incident response plan. These things with the response, but sometimes it'll go right to it depends on how you developed it. But for the disaster recovery plan here, it's the response. And then somebody needs to make a determination. Is this a disaster or not? If it's not, then deal with it a different way. If it is, then we need to activate the team. The initial response team should be mindful of assessing the facility safety, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, safety always comes first. And then activate the team. Lots of different ways to activate disaster recovery teams. But once a disaster has been declared, then the team gets assembled. Communications you need to control communications. There needs to be a single voice. If the news starts calling, there's a single voice. Somebody who's been trained to communicate with the news. You also need to have somebody who's trained to communicate, and it needs to be a single voice coming from the team to communicate with the rest of the organization. The last thing you want is various members of the team all giving different messages. That just creates a bunch of confusion. So anyway, communication and out of band if need be. Disaster recovery plans, you guys all have those? Disaster recovery plans? How do you handle out of band communications? What do you do for people on that? Do you have cell phones? Do you have a roster of cell phones, where people can call?
Smoke signals.
Smoke signals. A good tip too is to create a disaster recovery card, and on that card these are the important numbers and disaster recovery team members, hotline numbers, calling tree numbers might be on that card because people always keep their wallet. Yep, just like that. Yep. And then the assessment phase is a more thorough, more detailed assessment. We're trying to determine, what's the scope of what's happening. Maximum tolerable downtime is we're starting to measure ourselves against that for the critical systems. And then we recommend, as a team, we recommend what the next steps are going to be. One of the places you don't want to just store your disaster recovery plan is actually on site, right? You want to have off-site copies of your disaster recovery plan. We've seen people miss that too. And then reconstitution, and this will be a prioritized approach to reconstitution, right? You're starting with your most critical systems and ending with the ones that really don't matter all that much. There are cases where you'll use an alternative site because your original site has been destroyed or it's not habitable. There's lots of different strategies to deal with that, but understanding that wherever we're recovering needs to have the same physical security controls of the original site, right? Otherwise, we've created a whole other set of risks. And a salvage team, if you ever hear salvage team is meant to rebuild or get the primary facility back up and operational again. Any questions on the process for DRP? Developing the DRP, this is out of 800-34 again. Project initiation, somebody has to be a sponsor of this thing. It's not going to happen if you just decide you're just going to do it one day. You do need to get executive sponsorship, ideally board sponsorship. Scope the project, what's going to be in scope, what's out of scope. That'll determine whether this is a disaster recovery plan or a business continuity plan or whatever kind of plan it is. Conduct your business impact analysis. This is a part that's often overlooked as well. The business impact analysis is going to tell us our recovery time objectives, our recovery point objectives, our maximum tolerable downtime, all comes from the BIA, the business impact analysis. This is going to require that we actually go out and talk to the business, right? And I think it's a lot of work to do it the right way. Identify whatever preventative controls, the preventative controls. So if I've got a maximum tolerable downtime of 30 seconds on a critical server, will I be able to, that's a good candidate for some HA, right? That's a good preventative control. It's those types of preventative controls, preventing the system from exceeding those downtimes ahead of time. The recovery strategy, getting things back up and running again, the plan design and development. This is where you're going to determine, actually you will have already determined your team probably at the project initiation phase. They'll start identifying roles and responsibilities. Implementation, training, and testing. Different types of tests you'll need to know for the test, or for the different types of tests you'll need to know for the test. Right? Tabletop exercise, full interruption, parallel processing. Those will all be exam and testable, which we're going to get to here in a little bit. Any questions? You guys are all staying awake so far? This isn't all that exciting, is it? He likes doing them. Imagine this guy's life.
I like helping other people.
I actually like doing it. I actually like doing them too. I do like doing them.
There's a huge difference between saying, okay, here's what you need to do and helping figure out and identifying the steps, and then actually having to go in and fill in the details.
Right.
Filling in the details sucks.
You're ignoring it.
Yes.
Making a shoulder.
Yes.
So in the project initiation phase, number one, the policy statement. As a rule of thumb, everything in information security has to be found in policy. I don't do things unless there's some management approval authority to do it. So having a disaster recovery policy or a policy statement, conducting the business impact analysis, so identifying who the system owners are, who the application owners are, and then reaching out to them. And one of the ways that I've done a lot of BIAs is just simple questionnaires, right? And maybe an interview process, to clarify the answers I got on the questionnaires. But you're asking things like, what does this system do? Is it a money-making system? Is it a critical, just whatever. How long, in your estimation, could we go without this system? All that stuff in a BIA. Questionnaires are easy. Identifying the preventive controls, develop the recovery strategies. It'll all be driven from that business impact analysis. That's the key piece for everything else. If you skip that, the rest of it, you're just kind of shooting from the hip. You might get it right, you might not. Develop recovery strategies, develop an IT contingency plan. So this is even usually an IT contingency plan is if IT personnel are also not available to restore the systems, get the systems back up and running. What's the contingency plan for that? Do we have an outsourced IT provider that we can call in to help us restore these systems? Whatever. Maybe we have another, in a larger organization, I might have an IT contingent or team in another part of the country. So if this one isn't available, maybe I can bring them in to fill in, whatever. Need to account for that too. Plan maintenance. A lot of people have disaster recovery plans, but they're old. It's really, really common to find disaster recovery plans that are old. The way to keep your disaster recovery plan up to date is to tie it in with change management, right? So every time there's a change, one of the things in your change management process should be update the disaster recovery plan or evaluate the disaster recovery plan. So whoever owns the plan would be involved in the change management process and make a determination on whether or not we need to update network diagrams, update the whatever. You see what I'm saying? But whatever. That's if you want to make it work. Now you'll catch those in the next review cycle, in the next test cycle, maybe. But in between is when it gets funky. So management support, don't overlook this. Management support has to do this. You can get fired if you're not getting support for this, because this stuff costs money, right? Because the work that your company spends on this is work that they can't spend on other things. So getting management support, it's usually pretty easy, but don't overlook it. A project manager, they're going to be the person who's going to coordinate all the resources, do the typical project management stuff, identify what resources are required, hold people accountable, define schedules, all that kind of stuff is the project manager. They typically don't have much in-depth technical capability. They're project managers. They're good at managing resources. The continuity planning project team, I've never actually assembled a continuity planning project team before, but this is what they do. They have different responsibilities. Usually we just go right to assembling the disaster recovery team, identifying who's going to sit on that team. Because usually like HR, public relations, IT staff, physical security, those are all represented in the disaster recovery team as opposed to a continuity planning project team, but this is the official way to go about it. Scoping the project, what's in plan, what's not in plan. Don't overlook scope either. Scope creep sucks. You know, I mean, you start off with here and then you end up like global. It's crappy. So define the scope, document the scope, get everybody in agreement on the scope, go back to management if you have to get them to sign off on the scope. So then if scope creep starts to happen, he's like, well, the CEO said this is it, man. You know, you can go talk to him and see if you want to expand scope, and typically that'll die there. If-then statements is one way to define scope. If this happens, then what? If this happens, then what? This is kind of that same approach I was talking to you about before about the assumed breach. We do the same kind of thing typically in an incident management process. Is let's just assume this place gets blown up. If that happens, then what? Let's assume that this happened, or blizzard comes and we can't get to the office. If that happens, then what? That can be used to define what the scope is. Any questions on this? Same stuff, man. Executive management support is needed. They should approve the plan, how we're going to do this disaster recovery plan, and the plan itself. Their job, executive management and the board of directors, their job is to exercise due care and due diligence. And that's why they'll almost always sign up for this. They've all heard of Katrina, and they've all heard of all these huge natural disasters. And what that typically does then is it makes disaster recovery planning now the most significant risk in the organization, when truly it's not. I mean, how many of you have been through a disaster in your own environment? I mean, it's really pretty rare, right? The likelihood is usually very, very small. The impact can be pretty significant.
It's a giant pain.
But, it's not, disaster recovery planning is typically not the most significant risk in an organization. But, when it gets into the news, then it is. So assessing the critical state, this is really about prioritizing our systems, prioritizing who's affected, a lot of documentation. This can be driven from your business impact analysis. So your business impact analysis can be used to define your critical state potentially. Here's your BIA.
Like how one said, late paychecks are tolerable.
Late paychecks are tolerable?
For a short period.
Maximum 5 days.
So that's actually on the exam too, right?
Well, yeah, when you prioritize in the exam, they'll give you different types of systems and ask you to prioritize, sort of.
And pay is always going to be very high. Like payroll should be one of the first systems back up because people won't work for free.
Yeah. But having in your disaster recovery plan accrual, so communicating to employees, yes, we can't pay you now, but we'll accrue it or something, they'll buy that, but they won't buy like you're just not going to get paid.
For a short time.
For a short time, right. Yeah, teach your employees to save better. Be good stewards of your money. I know, right? Yeah, burns a hole right through your pocket. So assessing the critical state, your business impact analysis, this is, can't overlook it, but everybody does. Not everybody, but most people do. This will determine your maximum tolerable downtime for every critical IT asset. How long can we go before this is really going to hurt us bad? You should have that defined for all your critical assets. It should be documented in your disaster recovery plan so that you can prioritize your reconstitution phase. But this also feeds into the preventative controls and other things. 2 processes: identification of the critical assets, and then doing that comprehensive risk assessment. That's the traditional way of doing a business impact analysis. In reality, the way I do most business impact analysis is plural of analysis is questionnaires. Questionnaires and interview process. Yeah. Identify your critical assets, conduct the risk assessment. Risk assessment, vulnerabilities, and threats. Easy enough. This is what a risk assessment looks like. Risk assessment finding, the vulnerabilities, the business impact analysis, and mitigation. This is the book way, but most people don't do it this way. These are things that you'll need to know for your test. You'll need to know what these different acronyms are. So maximum tolerable downtime is how long I can tolerate a system being down before it's going to hurt really bad, right? Or the business will be severely impacted. That's also going to be the outer bound limit of when I recover that system, right? If we go beyond the maximum tolerable downtime, we could be in some serious trouble. Two metrics feed into the maximum tolerable downtime. That's the recovery time objective and the work recovery time. The work recovery time is how much time it takes to actually recover the system, how much work. The recovery time objective is when that work has to essentially start, right? Alternative terms for maximum tolerable downtime. So these are essentially the same terms, but you'll see them, used interchangeably. Maximum allowable downtime, MAD, maximum tolerable outage, and maximum acceptable outage. The most popular by far for these is MTD, the maximum tolerable downtime. But you have to memorize that as well. Failure and recovery metrics. Recovery point objective we talked about already a little bit. Recovery point objective is data driven. It's how much data I can accept losing, essentially. Recovery time objective is all time driven, but the same concept. Work recovery time is how much time it takes. So when we start the recovery, how much time does it take before that system is back up and running again? Mean time between failures, we've talked about before. That's usually the manufacturer can tell us the mean time between failures. That's how long I can expect the thing to run before it on average, it fails. Mean time to repair is to repair the actual hardware system. And then minimum operating requirements. I don't want to restore my servers outside, right? There has to be some humidity requirements, some power requirements, some temperature requirements. That's the minimum operating requirements piece, right? Really important for reconstitution. And all that stuff. So recovery point objective. The important thing about recovery point objective is the data. It's the data / work loss, but it's really data driven.
This really comes back to having the business owners and data owners do it, right?
Oh yeah.
Because as a custodian in IT, that was always the best. I like doing that. Is, well, how much do you need to lose, or like what could you tolerate losing? Oh God, this is critical, like an hour max. Okay, come back with a proposal that shows, well, in order to meet your requirements,
right?
It very quickly goes,
it's going to be
4 hours,
$250,000.
Yeah.
Right.
No. Well, really, yeah, 4, maybe 8 hours. 8 hours would be okay. We could recover from that.
Yeah. It's always going to be that trade-off.
Yeah.
Recovery time objective. This is all about time. So this one was all about data and work loss. This is all about time. So the mean time, maximum tolerable downtime equals recovery time objective plus work recovery time, right? That's an equation you'll have to know for the test as well. So the work recovery time is really how much time it takes the work, somebody actually doing something, configuring something, putting something back together again. That's the work recovery time. The recovery time objective is a function of the maximum tolerable downtime. Any questions on this? RTO and work recovery time? Mean time between failures, we beat the crap out of that one already. But there's more information there on the slides if you need that. Oh, did I get the slides? I did get the slides, Ted. Did you guys get the slides? No? Because I thought I got those to Brandon. Because I've been done with them.
Definitely got them to me.
All right. Yeah, my 16 million emails. Oh, I got to get going quick. Meaning, we're running out of time. What's that? Okay, because I have actually today's and I have next week's done. So I can get that out to Brandon, so you guys have that. Anybody have other tests scheduled yet or planning when they're going to schedule their exam? A year from now? 600 or is it 700 bucks?
Yeah. Yeah, I would set a date 2 to 3 months max. You have to
Yeah, you're doing
reschedule it, but
Yeah, you're right up.
June 14th.
Yeah, June 14th. Nice.
December online.
Yeah, but you're going to kill
Here's
it.
my wallet.
You'll more than make up for that investment, you know, and increased pay and whatever. We beat the crap out of Max. Any questions on mean time to repair or minimum operating requirements? Minimum operating requirements is really about the environment that you're going to restore things, you know, temperature, power, humidity, all those things kind of play into that. Identify your preventative controls. So once you've kind of figured out all the MTDs and all that other stuff, you know, what are the preventative controls? And like he was saying, okay, if we want to meet that maximum tolerable downtime, it's going to cost you $250,000, and then they'll start backing off. You know, oh geez, maybe not. It's not that critical, I guess. And that'll also feed into you know your recovery strategy, how we're going to get things back up and running. We'll start to prioritize. If this you know, again, back to the if-then statements, you know, this system comes up first, then this system, then this system. We're going to need some outside help to get this one back up and running again because it's the same priority as this other system. You know, all that stuff goes into your recovery strategy. Then we've got these things. So no BCP, DRP, which a lot of people have. Cold sites, warm sites, hot sites, and redundant sites. You're going to need to know the differences between those two, or those four. We're going to get to that. Did we already get to that?
No, we'll get to it.
Okay.
We did the same thing.
You did the same
I
thing?
was like,
Did I put that picture there just for the hell of it?
I
To throw you off?
but I went
Supply
through all of it
chain.
and then did that.
Supply chain management. This is really critical. Like I always ask, you know, sometimes we overlook like fuel delivery for data centers and for generators. That's the word I was looking for. Right. You know, if I've got a 500-gallon tank and it's going to get me X number of days, well, then that's a limitation. What about my fuel supply? And oftentimes we'll want fuel supply or multiple fuel supplies if it's a critical enough, you know, environment. Because we know that with all fuel supplies, it's going to be hospitals first, you know, critical infrastructure before it ever gets to me. So you have to account for all that kind of stuff in your supply chain management, getting things delivered, new systems, whatever. You know, that's all part of your supply chain management, which also should be a part of your recovery strategy. Telecommunications management, somebody needs to communicate with somebody, and we need to get systems communicating with other systems. And so ensuring that you've got telecommunications management implemented and part of your recovery strategy. Now that we're much more cloud focused, this is becoming less and less of an issue, but it still is a critical issue in some environments. Like here, we don't have a data center here. We store all of our things in the cloud in various places. So if this building were completely wiped out, it would be a pain in the ass, but it really wouldn't be much of a problem for us. So telecommunications management here isn't as big of a deal as it is, you know, if we did have a data center. Utility management, recovery options, this are all things that need to be part of your plan. All right, here we go, redundant sites. So redundant sites for those systems, for systems that have an MTD of nearly zero or zero, having a redundant site, right? A hot site, not even a hot site, it's a redundant site. It's a site that that's processing at the same time as the site that I'm using, right? So one site fails, there's no failover. It's running redundant. So everything's in real time. It is very expensive. Banks have this. Like US Bank has their primary data center in St. Paul, has a redundant data center in Eugene, Oregon, right? Redundant. They can't afford to have any downtime on some of those systems. Hot sites, less than an hour. So I've highlighted, that's what you need to remember about a hot site. A hot site has everything basically up and ready to go. We just need a failover. right? So these are MTDs of less than an hour. Warm site, a little bit longer now. Now we've got a maximum tolerable downtime of 1 to 3 days for a warm site. That's kind of the general number. It's definitely less expensive. It's got most of the components, the infrastructure components in place, but I'll have to do restores. I'll have to get servers back up and running. Yeah, you know, application-wise. The servers are there, but I need to make them work. And I need to restore all the data. Cold site, weeks, and not days. Really, what's at a cold site is just infrastructure. Yeah. Space. So I've got, you know, data. I've got power. I've got racks potentially. I've got maybe some switches, some things like that. But I'm going to need to put everything kind of back up and running on a cold site. So weeks, days. Reciprocal agreements. These are, I've seen them tried to be used before, but they don't really work because when push comes to shove, like, man, I'm at capacity. I'm not, sorry. Yeah, can't take you. Well, but we have this agreement. Okay, great. Sue me. You know, you'll be out of business anyway, maybe. But you see these sometimes with print shops. Printing companies will do this because, you know, printing equipment, there's often capacity at different printing companies where, you know, maybe they can take some of my print jobs and vice versa. So do you have a reciprocal agreement? Yeah. Bunch of them. Yeah. Also known as mutual aid agreements. Now, I've tried to write one of these before. Have a lawyer do it. Mm-hmm. I can't find any good sample language for one of these. Mobile sites is another recovery option. You can pay somebody to roll up with a mobile data center and park it wherever you want to, wherever your recovery site is going to be, and start operating out of that.
But test it because.
Yeah, test it and make sure they haven't oversubscribed.
Yeah, we had the auditor with the Fed who went out to a financial institution, and he learned they had this. They were excited because they got pinged in their previous bank exam for not having the continuity plan, disaster recovery plan. This is great. We found this data center on wheels. We make a phone call within X number of hours. They pull it up. We have a lot. We have a utility pole. We have the orders in. All we have to do is plug in the power, plug in the data. And he said, it's right down the street from where they were at lunch. You want to see it? My buddy got there and he said, now, how does this happen? We call the boat trailer, and he's walking around the pole, and then they do what? They plug into all right, there's a little gray box here. Are the connectors in there? He waited for his friend from the bank to open up the box. Taped and capped wire.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, what a mess.
There are legitimate ones, though. There are legitimate mobile sites that actually are legit, right? There's a number of providers for that. But yeah, you want to ask questions. You want to make sure you have, you know, really solid SLAs. You want to make sure that they're not oversubscribed, right? Because if there's if they've got 5 customers here and they've only got 3 trailers, you know, within a radius that can get here within enough time or whatever, then you're oversubscribed and not everybody's going to get it. So, you know, pray that you'll be the one.
The one that looks good on paper and the one that works good in real life.
Right. Yep. But for the test, it is a recovery option. Subscription services, there are places where you can outsource the entire everything for disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning. It's expensive, but they will come and they will do your business impact analysis for you. They'll do your disaster recovery plan for you. They'll make sure they got all the recovery options. They'll do the disaster recovery team, do the communications, everything. What do they call it? Soup to nuts?
Yeah.
That's what, you know, some of the subscription services are. Related plans, there's our DRP, there's our COOP again, our continuity of operations. Thing to remember about continuity of operations is during an actual disaster, it keeps the doors open. Business resumption plan, continuity of support plan, cyber incident response plan, occupant emergency plan, that's all about safety, it's all about getting people out, you know, safely. Crisis management plan, all those different plans. If you want to read more about those, here's some more information, a good reference. Beyond this, you know, you can look at NIST CISSP 800-34 if you really want to get more detail on some of the stuff. Otherwise, don't worry about it. There's our continuity of operations plan again. Alternative disaster recovery site. But during is I should have underlined the word during. That's the one way to determine what plan this is this is during the disaster. Nothing about getting the systems back up and running again. Business recovery plan, there's some stuff there. Probably not going to be all that testable, but what is here is essentially all you're going to need to remember about I've never created a business recovery plan before. I've created a number of disaster recovery plans and business continuity plans, but this is not one that I've done. Continuity of support plan, this is, having, who's going to support everything. It's more of there's two types of continuity of support plans. There's one that's internally focused, so users have somebody that they can call, but there's also an external sometimes continuity support plan. Our customers are going to start calling. How are they going to get supported? Cyber incident response plan, we've already talked about that before. Occupant and emergency plan is about getting people safe, getting people out, and then providing safe places for them to work potentially. Talked about safety wardens and meeting point leaders. Those are in that plan. Crisis management plan. So I've done crisis communications plans before, but not crisis management plans. But it's essentially how are communications going to flow and how are things going to be coordinated in a crisis. That's the crisis management plan. Calling trees in a crisis communications plan. Usually this is built into your disaster recovery plan or your business continuity plan. It's not a separate plan, but it could also be a separate plan if you wanted to. But calling trees, somehow everybody needs to know, or everybody who needs to know needs to know. And it's more than just the people sitting in the room for the disaster recovery team. So that's when you would leverage a calling tree, because last thing you want is one person making all these calls, right? Distribute that, distribute that, distribute that. That's how calling trees work. So starts at the top, distributes out. Managers will call their employees, and their employees will call their, whatever the plan calls for. Automated calling trees are the best kind of calling trees because people make mistakes, especially when there's a disaster, right? Because what do you think? Like, if there's a disaster, do you think I'm going to hurry up and rush in to work, or am I going to take care of my family first, right? I'm always going to choose my family first. So having an automated calling tree just takes the human element out of it, right? People can get notified, and whoever can come and assemble can come and assemble, but whatever. Automated calling trees, you always want the feedback. You want somebody to push a number or say a word or something to acknowledge that they got the call, right? That's really important, so that you'll have a roster of who's been notified and who hasn't, who's acknowledged the message and who hasn't. That becomes really important too when you're in a big disaster, when I'm trying to identify if all my people are still alive, So automated calling trees, having that feedback, all good stuff. Emergency Operations Center, this is where we're going to assemble and start, potentially doing work. So in a calling tree, assemble here, do this, do that, whatever. The Emergency Operations Center is where things will, a command post, if you will. Vital records, keeping those things off-site. The disaster recovery plan itself, the business continuity plan itself are vital records, so those should be stored off-site. Every member of your disaster recovery team should have a copy of the disaster recovery plan at home in a safe, or in a safe place. I suppose you could put it, lock it in your car somewhere too, if you wanted to. But
Encrypted thumb drive.
Just have multiple copies of it, right? And don't forget your decryption key. So I've seen that happen too. I've seen people have their backups and they're all encrypted, and then a disaster happens and they go to restore and nobody backed up the recovery key, right? And it's like, our backups are useless because we can't. Yeah, it's a bad place to be in. So vital records, having those off-site, and that's it. I'm 3 minutes over, but I started 3 minutes late. Any questions on any of this so far? All right. No class on Thursday. Please do catch up and Brad was saying, consider when you're going to take that test. The longer you wait between the time you're done studying to taking the test, the more it's going to have to deteriorate and you have to pick yourself back up again. So,
And the more life happens and you make excuses.
so think about that stuff. I don't have $700 to lend you to schedule your test, but if I did, I would. You know I would. All right. Thanks, guys. So I think you're teaching Tuesday, right?
Sure. Maybe, I don't know.
Sure. Why not?